distinct pleasure to introduce you all to a dear friend of mine who wrote an amazing book with his co-author, Chris Merritt, called Knott's Preserved, which really attempted to tell the story. There's a few copies still floating around out there. It's becoming harder and harder to find, so if you haven't gotten a copy yet, I really recommend that you track it down on Amazon. I don't know if the gift shops here have any more.
Yes.
Just a couple left. Virginia's gift shop?
Yeah.
You'll sign it.
Outside the park?
Sign it.
That's right. Eric will sign it.
And the candy store.
And the candy store.
Yeah,
thank you. So I'd like to call up Eric Lynxwiler to the stage. And Eric will be presenting tonight's presentation in two parts. First, we're going to call up John Waite, and then we're going to call up Garner Holt and Bill Butler, and Eric will explain to you who these people are. So if we break, stay seated because there's a second part coming. And Eric, the floor is yours.
Awesome.
Be gentle.
Oh. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I want John to come up here with me. Some of you may be a fan of John's. I'm a member of the John Waite fan club, and this is John Waite. For those of you who don't know this fellow,
Lift me up.
we'll get a hoist.
Probably be short.
For those of you who have no idea who this fellow is, he's been with Knott's Berry Farm for decades, worked under Bud Hurlbut for decades, and as many people have said, even though you cringe at it, one of the grandfathers of Halloween haunts.
Oh.
He was there in 1973 and helped Knott's Berry Farm figure out what Halloween haunt would become. And you were very influential with log ride and mine ride treatments, but we'll get to that a little bit later. I want to borrow you as we walk down memory lane. We are going to look at a whole bunch of photographs of old Knott's history on our little PowerPoint presentation and share with you the past of the mine ride. But before I do that, before I get to the mine ride itself, I want to give you the basis for what brought the mine ride to us. I'm going to do this a little bit. This is a map of the park way back when. Before there was ever a mine ride, there was a giant arena. You can see where we are located. We're in the steakhouse over by the grill. That steakhouse is this same room at Spur's Restaurant. And up in the very top corner is an arena. That was a live rodeo arena for a Mark Smith horse show. The horse show was a terrible tragedy and it didn't make any financial value whatsoever. It actually tanked. Then they put another show in there with gifted animals doing tricks, and that didn't work, and it died a terrible death. And it just sat vacant. Bud Hurlbut was doing some concessions. He had a carousel concession. Eventually he had a little train concession, a little car concession, and proved himself to Walter Knott, so that when Walter Knott said, "I've got this big piece of property, what can I do with it?" Bud knew that he had to come up with something that was a lot better than that arena. It was Bud's duty to tear down that arena in order to build something new for these people. Let's not forget the basis of Knott's Berry Farm. It's with those two in the very middle, that's Walter and Cordelia Knott. They lived on this property with their children. To the left is Marion and Tony, and to the right, Virginia and Russell. Their names are all over this place. Mrs. Knott's Chicken, that's her right in the middle. They ran this establishment as a family-based company, but they did have concessionaires working every other gift shop, running their own little adventures. And Bud Hurlbut was one of those fellas. For those of you who have no idea, that's Bud Hurlbut and his carousel. The carousel is still out there in Fiesta Village, what is now Fiesta Village. And Bud Hurlbut was a wonderful and very shy guy. He basically let the Knott family take all the credit for what he was doing and stood in the background and let Knott's Berry Farm be Knott's Berry Farm. But I think that one thing that we can all agree on is that he's the man that turned Knott's Berry Farm from a roadside attraction into a full-fledged theme park. And he did it with these great themed environments. Feel free to chime in anytime.
Well, I should say that what you've said so far is absolutely true. The farm, actually, as I understood it, was not really doing real well when they had the arena for the horses and the chickens doing tricks and whatever. And they needed something bigger. And so Walter came to Bud and he said, "Now Bud, I've got this prime piece of property. It's right here." He was pointing to where the arena was. He said, "Is there something that you could do, or we could put in there that you could do, that would work for the farm?" And I remember him saying that at the time, he said, "It's the only time I lied to Mr. Knott." But he said, "I had my fingers crossed behind my back." But Walter said, "You know, do you know of something? Could you do something there?" And Bud said, "Absolutely." But he hadn't a clue what he was going to do.
It actually took him a while to figure out what he was going to develop on that site. His initial concept was for a small, 2-story tall mountain, and inside would be a dark ride with a mine theme in which ore carts with 2 to 4 people would travel through on a conveyor system, and people would see the workings of a mine in this little tiny environment. However, Bud, as the concessionaire in charge of this mountain concession, realized that he could make a lot more money if he put a lot more people into the attraction. Maybe, instead of doing 2 to 4 people per car, he could build a train, something that he was very good at. Miniature trains, small trains, donkey engine trains, and maybe put 50 people behind it, each paying a ticket price. He did very well with that concept, but with 50-person trains, in the end, 6 trains total, he wound up developing a 7-story tall mountain. And I'm going to say this several times as we go, he paid for all that himself. Not many people realize it, but it was Bud who put the money into this attraction. From his own pockets, he wound up mortgaging his house, and I think he sold a car in order to build that mountain. It's hard to see it, but believe it or not, that is the mine ride. The Calico Mine Company Mine Ride.
Could I make one comment here on the cost of building? What you've said so far is true. Bud sold everything. He sold his car, he sold his home. He wouldn't sell his wife, but anyway, he finally had to go to Mr. Knott and say, "Mr. Knott, I'm at the bottom of my pockets. I haven't one more penny that I can put into this. I'm sorry, but I'm at the end of my rope on it." And Walter Knott said to Bud, he said, "Bud, don't worry about it. Just go ahead, we're going to build this." And he said, "You're not going to pay rent until this is up and running. So just go ahead, use that money, and finish this ride." And that's what he did.
Walter Knott was so invested in the ride himself, not financially invested, but just interested in the entire build-up, that Bud would show up early one morning to the construction site, and there would be old 70, 80-year-old Walter Knott climbing the I-beams of the structure, inspecting the way it was built. And of course, Walter approved of everything, but Walter was very much involved from beginning to end. I mentioned earlier the trains. The trains are a big part of this mine ride, and a big one of the things that I enjoy so much about the attraction. That was one of Bud's specialties, was he made and sold miniature trains nationwide. He would sell a train to Knott up north, he would sell a train to another theme park, another amusement park. And he was so good at it, he said, "Well, let's build 6 of them." And out of these 6, he came up with a design, and then based on that, brought you individual cars, each with their own unique character. Out of the 6 trains, they each had their own distinct color, their own distinct style, their own distinct shape, and I believe we still have all 6 still intact. In fact, all of the cars that are running behind the trains are about 99% original to 1960. They've hardly changed over the years. Maybe the decals and paints on the front, but the back engines have pretty much stayed the same.
I think they call those donkey engines. It was very primitive, I mean, it was very small, and it was used at mines and did work. But Bud disguised it the way he did, and it came out looking wonderful. It's what we all know today, and you'd never guess what's pulling it inside.
Let's take a
We did have to hook it up to the electric lines every night, recharge the batteries.
Perfect. The thing I'd like to point out about this particular image is the traffic that's on these trains, the traffic that's on the mountain. Out of the 6 trains, you can have 5 trains running at a time. It's a big enough track that you can actually have 5 trains running, or at least have 2 loading while you have...
I have to jump in here because he could run 6.
He could, he did.
He had a safety system in the ride. It was very, very critical when you had 6 trains. And everybody had to stay on the clock, which if you look at the engines today, you'll see a clock in there. And but it was extremely critical. But they could do it, and boy, they could put a lot of people through there. That was a high-capacity ride, 50 passengers a train, and the trip was, I think, around 6-7 minutes. So,
as to my understanding, you can put about 24,000 people a day through this attraction at its peak. That's the number that I understand. Well, I did the math, and at 50 cents an adult, he was doing pretty darn well. I mentioned it cost him about $1.5 million of his own money to put this together. He was in the black a year later. So he did pretty darn well. But then Bud did run this attraction. It was his concession. He owned the mountain, but not the land, and then paid rent to Walter Knott. Eventually, the Knott family and company wound up buying him out all of his attractions because he had multiple on the property. The log ride, of course, would come later. But that's what I wanted to talk about. 24,000 people a day could go through that mountain. Let's look at the mountain itself, 7 stories tall. Incredibly broad, it was only meant to be seen from the front. They didn't really plan for Knotts to grow beyond that portion of the park to the parking behind. He never put the mountainscape on the back side of the property that now faces Boardwalk Roaring 20s area. This is the detail that I just love and adore. And what I'm going to talk about in this point is that the loading zone is in the middle of the mountain. Many of you have ridden this attraction over and over again. You have to walk into the mountain and then walk up a level in order to get to the loading dock. He did that on purpose. The mine ride is, and I'm going to take a risk and say this, a lot of people may go, really? Is a roller coaster system. It's a big gravity-fed roller coaster in disguise as a dark ride. You basically start in the middle and then you descend. You go all the way to the bottom, and then you hit a lift hill, and you ride up to the very top, and gravity takes you all the way back to the middle again. It's basically braking all the way down as you go. Would you agree?
And virtually it is. They had several places where they did have to get a little bit of juice, but you're right. It was basically braking all the way down. Bud had put in a safety brake system in the track, so that if a train ran away, that this system would stop it.
I love this photograph, and I heard a few people gasp when I put it up there.
Yes.
This is, I don't believe this is opening day, but it's close enough. This is Knott's Berry Farm in a golden era, definitely. The mine ride, as you know it, was part of a greater complex. The train was a part of it. There was also a mule complex next door where you would ride the burros, basically. It was a part of the mountainscape. They actually designed the mountain around the burro path. But they also designed that mountain so that you would, like I said, start in the middle in order to begin your trip. By doing so, starting in the middle, he did it for a technical reason. But by starting in the middle, he created what, you can argue this as well, the world's first hidden switchback cube. How can I explain this? It's the world's first hidden line in which you walk into a themed environment and you cannot see the path in front of you to know how long the line is. That is basically the definition. When Walt Disney, who was friends with Bud Hurlbut and Walter Knott, saw the mine ride, he said, "Oh, I'm only here for a minute. I've got to get to a meeting, but I want to ride this, and there's nobody in line." So he got in line, and there was a whole ton of people in front of him. And he said, "Bud, you so-and-so." I didn't know that there was 100 people. 100 people in front of me. From 1960 onward, Disneyland's design changed. Instead of having pole queues, Disneyland started to have themed queue environments as well. And it came back to this attraction. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to check. I need to make sure I'm doing that right. Even from the aerial perspective, fantastic mountainscape. Definitely Knott's Berry Farm started with its own style of rock work. That's Walter and Cordelia in one of the first mine cars that actually went out in 1960. That's Walter in the middle in the hat, and then two feet over is Cordelia, sitting away from her husband. We won't explain that. We know. Once you step foot inside, you enter a dark, dark cavern. That first dark cavern is filled with absolutely nothing. That first space has nothing to see whatsoever, and they did that on purpose in order to allow your eyes to adjust to the darkness. It was very important. You go from the daylight into a black area, and then you have this room. This is the pot room, colloquially known as the pot room. And it was full of steaming geysers. The phrase was, many a miner has stuck his pick into old Mother Earth, and only to have a hot steaming geyser erupt in his face.
Could I just add something here? When Bud first started this, now this was before I knew Bud Hurlbut, but I heard the story over at the shop several times, that when they first started, they used driller's mud in the pots, and they were bubbling real steam up through the pot, through the mud. Well, what happened was the mud kept growing. The water made it keep growing. They were running in there between trains, ladling out pots as fast as they could. Otherwise, they would have had mud all over the place. So they quickly had to change, and I got involved in some of that in later years.
We'd love to hear about it. We'd love to hear about it.
Oh, okay. Come on.
I want to know that story. Tell us.
There was a special effects man. He was a movie man by the name of Maurice Ayres. Maurice became acquainted with Bud Hurlbut through Aero Development. Many of you maybe have heard that name over the years. And Maurice's wife, all of her family worked for Aero Development. So it was natural that Maurice would too. Maurice was very, very creative. He came from the movie business. And so we get to the pots, and Bud put he and I on that project to see how we could solve it. So what we decided to do, Maurice fiberglassed with the color in it, all of the pots, even with the splashes, and made it look like it was splashing around. He built little troughs in front of each pot that was not visible from the train. And in that trough is where he had the steam line with a drain that would go down below to the basement and drain off. So we overcame the problem of growing pots that way. Then how do we make it look like it's mud and still not mud? So we decided the Hollywood Wax Museum was in business at that time. I was intrigued by one of their scenes that, I can't remember the name of the film, but it was a battleship and it was sinking, PT something, yeah. And it had a tank of water, but it was cloudy. You couldn't see the bottom. So I inquired, found out they used a product called, guess what? Cloud X. Which to me smelled like machine oil. But anyway, by adding the Cloud X to the water became opaque. Then the colored light from above would be whatever color that pot was going to be. And then Maurice developed what we called a bubbler. And it was a heavy unit, it sat on the bottom. It had an inverted fiberglass cup, or whatever you want to call it there, and the air was coming up underneath it. When it would fill with air, it would just automatically tip up this way, and what did you get? Bloop. So you even got the sound, besides the water. So that's what we lived with, really, for the rest of the time that Bud had the mine.
And it's pretty much the same to this day.
I think it is, although now I think they're just bubbling through it.
No, every now and then, when the water level is low, you can actually see the cup come up.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Look for it. Maybe the water level is low.
Well, it worked. It was simple, but it worked.
It functioned very well.
Absolutely.
But we've gotten to see a few of the water features inside that early portion of the mine, the first portion of the mine, where blind fish cannot see the light of day. Yes, but that's a whole different joke. Some of you understand what I'm talking about. We're just discussing this field, in other words. But let's show some of the people that populate this environment. And we suddenly reach the proverbial glory hole. I'll give you a small story, and I've already heard a few people snicker, so it's okay to talk about this. Google it if you must. My publisher of the Knott's Preserved book said, I didn't know if glory hole was one word or two, so I looked it up. And she said, we cannot use that word in the book. I said, I'm sorry, but it's the name of the feature, and it is a mining term, it really is. And I'm not explaining that any further at all. It is a traditional gold mine. And it would not have any female characters in it at all, but it does have an ethnically diverse group of men. And what we have learned through looking at some of the old home footage that we saw earlier, which was taken by Bud Robit himself, that early on, a lot of these figures were not animated. In the very, very early years, they were not animated. They were just mannequins dressed to look appropriately. But they were ethnically diverse mannequins, set into poses that would look like they were about to do something. They were only animated later. In fact, by the time you arrived in 1969, they were animated by that time.
They were starting to animate them. Bud had one animated figure in there. It really was kind of laughable, but it was a guy that was facing one of the walls, and he was just going like this. And periodically he'd fall apart. But that was the only animated figure they had for a long, long time. Of course, they had the ore cars were going back and forth. The bucket was going up and down. And again, Maurice Ayres got involved in this, and he built figures that have the axe that are kneeling and pounding or standing and doing something. And Maurice also developed the ore car that went from one side to the other, back and forth. And we added a lot more through Maurice, added a lot more animation to the entire scene.
One of the things that I was impressed about in looking at these original photographs, and I think we've lost this over the years, is that Bud in 1960 made sure that we knew that working in a mine was a dangerous place. Even though from the mine car you might not have been able to see it, but that first man has a peg leg. He's missing a leg. He has a peg leg. What you can't see is the man to his right is actually wearing an eye patch. That character has an eye patch on. So you are being told in these visual ways that this is a very dangerous place to be working. It might seem a little bit treacherous, but it was also meant to teach us what these early Americans did in order to make their American dream come true. They worked really hard in dangerous conditions in order to find that vein of gold and become instantly rich. It was the American dream. This is Bud Robit right in the middle, wearing his signature tie. And he's standing next to some of the characters at the base of the glory hole, the one with the peg leg and the one with the eye patch. As I said earlier, these are some very still figures. We have to hope that he, for the sake of show scenes, removed the electrical cord from the bottom of some of these, from the bottoms of some of these characters. The electrical cords just wouldn't have fit into a mine ride. Ethnically diverse. The elevators in the mine ride, you drive past them twice on two different levels in order to make it look like there's different elevators. But yes, that's a Chinese blast fellow. He actually was one of the characters that would plant the powder for explosives. And I'm actually a big fan of this. I'm going to take a risk and actually point out that Pirates of the Caucasian Caribbean doesn't have such things. And they developed their attraction 7 years after the mine ride. In fact, you could say that it was influential in getting Pirates of the Caribbean to become Pirates of the Caribbean, filled with so many animatronics. And yet, here's this one filled with so many male figures first, 7 years beforehand.
On the upper level, near the elevator, you all probably have had air blown at you, cold air blown at you from a tunnel, and that's also a very thing that they could find in a mine, an air shaft like that, and it's very real. It catches some people off guard. They're looking down in the glory hole, and suddenly behind them is this blast of cold air that they go by.
Which actually feels great on a hot day. This takes me to the educational part of our lecture. The educational part being something that Walter Knott wanted to see happen in the mine ride. He wanted this attraction to be real and teach people how mining occurred. And this is your square set timbering room. The spiel, the miner who would guide you on your tour and gives the spiel can sometimes tell you all about square set timbering. And this is the square set timbering room. All of the figures were static at this point, with just, I think that rope moved eventually. And, well, it was just Walter Knott's desire to make sure that people walked out of there and learned something from it. That it wasn't just a sit and look scene, that people actually walked out and knew how to go and mine something in the middle of California. That's Bud Probert again, on the right, not the left. Just cleaning up a scene. Bud Probert really liked to be behind the scenes, but every now and then you would see him on the attraction. Did he ever give the attraction? Did he ever guide it? Did Bud Probert ever lead a train?
Did he ever drive a train? I frankly can't answer that as to whether he drove a train with passengers. I don't know. Well, of course, here, what am I saying? For the movie that they made, for the commercial, he's driving that train.
Family builds him out.
And if he did a bad job, they'd be in trouble because it had the whole about family and everybody of importance was on that train.
One of the things that the Knott's maintenance department just recently renovated, maybe in the last year or so, is they finally got the rock smasher to work again. The rock smasher is that thing in the back of this photograph just as you exit the top of the mountain. The rock smasher had not been working forever, but it's one of the loudest, clangiest devices ever, and it really gets your attention. I was fortunate enough to go behind the scenes and see what's back there. It is a fascinating piece of machinery that nobody ever gets to see, just to see how they collect rocks on a conveyor belt system, real honest to God chunks of rock, and throw them up onto a chain drive and then drop them again. It's just incredible. And messy too. Every now and then you have to remember to go into that room and put the rocks back on the conveyor belt because they just go flying. There's a reason why we don't get to see it, but it is a fascinating piece of machinery. Outside and then back in, and then we have we have to have a lift hill eventually. This is our lift hill. And this is a big deal for Bud Probert because in 1960, this 25-degree lift hill on your roller coaster attraction, taking you all the way up to the very, very top. This particular lift hill, nobody wanted to touch it. No engineering firm would help Bud design this thing. They all said no, 50 people, giant train, 25-degree lift hill, no, you're on your own. And Bud did design it on his own. It was only about a year or two ago that we changed the chain. It had been in operation ever since 1960, the very same.
Could I jump in here just for a moment? This is a rather important part because Bud, he was an engineer. His wheels were going all the time, and he couldn't figure out why roller coaster people always had to put the motor at the bottom. He felt it should be at the top. And so everybody else said he was crazy and said it wouldn't work. So anyway, he put it at the top. Now the one little thing that a lot of people didn't know, there was a huge wheel there that was part of the mechanism at the top of the lift. And when they started it up the first time, it came loose. It fell. It went down every story of the mine, fell through the floor, ended up down in the bottom. and it broke, of course. So to this day, it is part of the scenery there. But felt it was easier to leave it in the scenery than try to take it out. So it is part of the scenery at the bottom of the lift there. But he did, you're right, he developed a oiling system. Nobody else did it. He developed that. He felt that that chain should stay oiled, and look how long it lasted.
Indeed. Well, from this point, we ascend into what is basically known as heaven. Bud Robert was really afraid with all those macho men doing macho minor things in their minds that it wouldn't attract any females to his audience, that the women folk who were riding on his train would be bored. I understand. What he wound up developing was a true piece of natural phenomena. Walter Knott asked, could this possibly exist? Is this real? This cavern with all of these stalactites and stalagmites, would this really exist? And Bud said, yeah, of course, it's real. And he's right, it's true. It just wasn't lit with black light in nature, but it was lit with black light in his attraction. And of course, as you ascend to the top, the lights are just stunning and gorgeous, and everything was a beautiful, serene shade. Eventually, over time, I believe that the stalactites and stalagmites were painted to be a little bit more colorful. We got a little bit more color in there, and then Halloween Haunt came into the attraction and just spray painted the hell out of everything willy-nilly. That's a different story. But you had a story you wanted to tell me about the stalactites and stalagmites. If you feel comfortable sharing.
I think, I'm not sure if this is in your book or not, but anyway, Bud had this going around with Walter Knott about the authenticity of such a display in this ride. And Bud did convince him enough through books that Bud had read and showed Mr. Knott that they did break into caverns. Of course, rarely would they break into one as large as this one, but still, it has its place. And one day, Bud and Mr. Knott were standing outside the ride, just talking or watching the people, and some lady came up to Bud, or came up to both of them, and she said, I don't know if either of you work here, but she said, I'm looking for that ride or play that you go into and you're going up and it goes bump, 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 going up a hill, and you come out in this, like coming into heaven. And Bud had a little smile on his face and he looked at Walter. Walter said, okay, you win.
It's a beautiful space, but the one thing I'm really going to point out, stalactites, stalagmites, sure, that's what make the space. But one thing that I really love about it is that it has its own theme music.
Yeah.
Yay. Thank you. It's hard for me not to look at photographs like that without hearing the organ and its tremulant playing in the back of my head, because that piece of music is essentially the last custom piece of music that Knott's Berry Farm has. We don't have another one at the moment. I mean, I'm sure several of us could start breaking into the Fairy Tales theme song, which is off property, but we've still got the Robot Cavern theme, which was written just for this. And just to let you know, I did talk to, just completely coincidentally, a man approached me to say, I was trained on the organ by the man who played that actual theme song. He played it over and over again for his students, and he said that he designed this theme to sound like wind blowing through a cavern, to sound like wind whipping through and around stalactites. It's fantastic, and I'm glad we've still got it. And the grand finale. I kind of dig this. The grand finale, maybe to our eyes today, seems a little bit kitschy. It's kind of like where the roller coaster in this attraction lets go of all the brakes and they scream that engine through this room as fast as they can in order to get everybody to fall on the floor. But I think originally in the 1960s, people really were falling to the floor. This cave-in actually did freak people out. It was animated with a ceiling drop, and as you can see, it's not just a paint, it's not just a canvas, it's actually painted to look like rockwork is falling in on you. Later editions brought in other animations to the scene, but one of the things that I enjoyed about it, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, you're the man to know, that Bud Hurlbut, you couldn't actually just go to a Hollywood studio and buy a sound from them. You had to figure out how to make that sound on your own. So Bud Robot went out into the desert with dynamite and a tape recorder. And he actually blew up dynamite with a tape recorder running in order to get the sound of explosions for this last scene. He had to make his own soundscape for the concluding scene.
Did you say where he did it?
No, please.
He did it at Calico. Out to Calico, out in the kind of the boondocks there. By the way, that is a Hurlbut train that is at Calico today. But they went out in the boondocks out there and they took dynamite and they blew the biggest blast you could imagine. Scared the heck out of them. But nobody was hurt. And that's what you hear today in the Mine Ride.
Wow.
Now, the Mine Ride was very influential, obviously, very
Could I
influential.
just add something? We did something before Bud sold his rides, about the last 3 years. Some of you might have ridden the ride and remembered it. But again, this Maurice Ayers and I went in to see what we could do with that explosion to make it something really, really good. And so we experimented. We took a 4x10 piece of plywood, hinged it on a wood platform so that it could fall directly toward the train, come within inches of them. Of course, it would squeeze air out too. We had it to a gate latch. He stood in the back of the scene with a piece of rope attached to the latch. I had a big piece of metal that I could shake and make a lot of noise. So the train comes around the corner. We're all ready. I rattled my thunder. We both are screaming at the top of our lungs, fire in the hole. He pulls on the rope, the wall falls. Not one person looked at it. We tried this 3 or 4 times and finally figured out, Maurice said, the thing that's going to work in this explosion is to have a whole bunch of things going on at the same time. And nobody's going to see it all. They're going to see different things when they go through, depending on where they're sitting. And so we did that. We had 3 boulders, huge boulders made out of foam. And they were pulled back to the sides and air released them so they could swing right down almost to the train, stop, and the bottom of it would come up probably within, what, 2-3 feet of people's faces. We really scared them. And we had other things falling. Bill Hall, the mechanic there, loved the falling barrel stunt. As old as the hills, the old funny fright stunt. So he built his own barrels. We had them for a while over on the log ride. He put them, and I think they're still there today, aren't they? But anyway, he wanted that. But what we wanted to create was just everything coming apart, a lot of things happening. You're going to see different things depending on where you're sitting in the train and what goes off when. And the beams, they had to come down fast, and we did that as well. They came down in two increments. And that way people saw them. Now I go through and they talk about them, but they're already down. I didn't see them come down. So I'm so excited about the future.
We'll talk about that in a moment. We will say that the Mine Ride was very influential. So influential that it curated a fashion trend for the Herald Examiner. Seriously, this came out of the Orange County Archives. It's a fantastic collection of stuff. So the Mine Ride was so influential that gold was in season at JCPenney and Robinson's. But I think the point is that the ride lives on. It opened in 1960. It's still with us to this day. One of the icons of Knott's Berry Farm. That helped Knott's Berry Farm turn from a roadside attraction into a theme park, and a granddaddy of all theme parks at that. I'm going to say thank you. You rock. Thank you so much for being here. have a few minutes, I'm going to introduce you to the future of the attraction. Garner Holt and Bill Butler, would you please come on up? We're not revealing too much. We're not. I'm putting that out there right now. We've got a lot of big plans, and those plans are still in the works. We are going to talk about a few things, but I think that we need to discuss how influential the attraction was, but Robert, what he meant to you two. What were your first memories of Mine Ride, Log Ride?
Well, I'll start out. I'm a lot older than Bill. I was born in 1960, and I remember, my first memories of the mine ride were, riding with my parents, probably in the vicinity of being 8 years old or so, probably 68. And it has a real special meaning to me because that's, if some of you know about Garner Holt Productions and my company, that we do things for Disney and that, and Disney was something that was real influential to me in the beginning, but Knott's was probably just as influential because prior to, I know that when I was 6 or 7 years old, maybe 8, was when I first was taken to Knott's. That's the time that, the miner or the Haunted Mansion was in '69. So I probably, had a chance to see these things. I remember having the postcards and just being fascinated. I mean, I thought it was a real mine, a kid, at that age, in the days that you didn't have all these fancy attractions like, the partly the ones at Disneyland. You are amazed and, not expecting to see something like that. So, as a child, I think that I believed it was a real thing. And as I became older and, saw the log ride and realized that, know that this is a man-made thing and had figures and things like that, I was, super fascinated in that and wanted to emulate that, so I got to understand about Disneyland and the Haunted Mansion and things. But, I remember riding on with my parents, and it's a lot of real special memories, those times. I don't know, what was your first recollection of it?
Well, to immediately discredit any scholarship, we've got for this. This had no bearing on our company getting the contract. The Mine Ride is my favorite ride in the world. I was just a happy coincidence. I went on the Mine Ride first as a little kid, and I came to Knott's before I went to Disneyland ever. It made such a huge influence on me, I was immediately smitten by it. There was a Lego model that had just come out that had a bunch of rocks in it. I thought, wow, this is perfect. So I bought a bunch of that Lego model and built a model out of Legos of the Mine Ride. And I had little LGB engines, the little friction motor ones that they used to give away with some of the sets, and those kind of resemble Bud's engines. And so I had this relatively accurate little Lego model of that that I continued to add to. So the Mine Ride was a little bit of an obsession for me as a kid, and I think it's, to this day, the finest piece of immersive themed attraction in the world, really.
Well, I was just going to say, it's amazing that, with this attraction, you can go on this attraction and then the log ride, and look at, the genius of this man. How well these have held up. You can put these against other attractions worldwide that are built today with today's technology, and these things hold up to them as fabulous attractions. That's amazing.
That's one of the things that I completely agree, and one of the reasons why I'm thrilled with the log ride, the way it worked out. The log ride is a fantastic attraction. And then Garner Holt and his crew, I keep saying Garner Holt is the company and the man is standing right here. Garner Holt and his crew went in and did something fantastic with it that you all got to see this evening. We're expecting... I think that these people are also expecting big things to come from Mine Ride. Is there anything that you could tell us about the future of the Mine Ride? Anything at all? I'm leaving it to you.
Well, I'd like to say that, speaking log ride first, it's a great honor and blessing to be able to be involved with these attractions. These are classic original attractions that are just amazing, and like I say, going through these as children and getting to be able to touch these things and be able to go in and, you know, do unique and new things. Bill's generated a lot of great designs and scripts and things for him, and have a great staff that, you know, builds all this stuff. And you know, we're really happy to be able to do it. We were just discussing with somebody, you know, we didn't have a lot of time to do the log ride. It was this time, literally last year, that Knott said, okay, you can do it. And we did it in 4 months, and about half a month to install it.
Shocking, shocking.
Yeah, and, you know, I'm crazy enough that if I like something well enough, they could have told me I had a week to do it, and I probably would have figured out a way to do it. You know? So, you know, if I like something enough, I'll just wait it out until I can do it, you know. But so we were pleased that Knott's was pleased with what we did with the log ride enough to immediately say thereafter, you know, you're going to work on the mine ride, and we were excited. And then they turned it on many months ago. So it wasn't something that just started, you know, now. And so we've had a really good jump start on it, and, you know, been able to, I think most of our sculpting is done and things of that nature. So, you know, we've been able to really get a good start. And, you know, would you comment on that?
Just a comment for an anecdote about the time it takes to do stuff. Were any of you guys at the rededication of the log ride? While that was happening, I was sitting in the flume programming the guy in the tent. I was really hoping that they'd give us a little more time. I think for the future in this, we're kind of looking at the past. If anybody's got one of the original souvenir, really cool printed tickets for this ride, it gives this whole story on how this thing was found. And it really is, as we were hearing earlier, tries to give a historical perspective. There's a lot of parts about mining that weren't touched on. So we're looking at a lot of those things to influence what's going on for the future.
I would say, you know, the thing that I tell people a lot is, you know, we do a lot of things for all the parks, you know, Universal and Disney and Knott's and things. And you know, we're always talking to people and having people ask about what we do. And, you know, one of the first things I say about myself, and I know Bill's included in this, and many of the people in my shop, is we were fans like you long before we were vendors. You know, that's why I do what I do, because I was a fan. And we think very highly of these attractions. And you know, when I first met Bill and brought him on board and he got involved in the company, one of the first things I noticed about him is that he was like you know, still to this day, I mean, you know, somebody will say, well, you know, want a fact about an attraction, I'll say, hey, you know, is this, or how many people, or this, that. He's a walking encyclopedia about attractions. And, you know, that's because we're fans, and he was a huge fan, and he and I both are very concerned about accuracy and what the original intent was. You know, Bud's original intent for the attractions to educate and inform and be accurate and everything else. I didn't even, just a few minutes ago, I had no idea. You know, we're learning things every day. We're hearing his story, and he talked about the guy with the peg leg. I leaned over to Bill here and I said, does our guy have a peg leg? Do we have a guy with a peg leg in there? And he said, you know, I don't think so. I never heard that. And I said, well, we need to find out, because you'll probably see a guy with a peg leg. I mean, we want to do what is right and what was intended, so we're going to find out why that was the case, and if that was a true intention to have that, try to represent something accurate at that time, we're going to try to incorporate it. You know, I'm not ashamed to say that we're constantly trying to make it better, make everything we do better, and try to do the right thing, you know, and have people and companies and clients look at it and say, wow, you guys cared so much, you did the right thing, and not just came in and, you know, worried about the almighty dollar. You know, that's not all it is, you know, so.
I think that's brilliant. And our little group today influenced the attraction. Isn't that fantastic?
I'm going to go find that wheel that fell through the thing too. I heard that story, and I'm like, where the heck is that in the place? I want to see that. You know?
That was news to me too.
When we're taking the tour, maybe He can show us where that wheel is.
John, you have to point out that wheel when we take the ride.
Broken wheel that fell through the roof.
Norm will explain. Speaking of influential, perhaps as we continue this little conversation, we can say things like, when it came to Log Ride, Knott's Berry Farm helped out a lot with lighting and sound.
Oh yeah, tons.
The lighting department at Knott's and the sound department at Knott's worked on Log Ride. They're going to do the same thing with Mine Ride. Do we have any idea if the organ music in that chamber will stick around? The organ music.
Getting old, kind of old, but you know.
It's getting old.
You're thinking of rock and roll organ, you know?
That's true. We could just put some guitar in there.
Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Aerosmith sounds like air going through a cavern. Maybe not. I'm hoping that that organ music does stay. I know that it's an antique track. The track is a little grainy, but we're hoping.
We think that organ music is as important to this mountain as the organ music is to the mansion. Right?
I can't wait to see what kind of a paint job that scene gets, as well as the rest of the mountain. Fingers crossed that will happen. The Log Ride got a paint job. My fingers are crossed that Mine Ride will as well. That has nothing to do with you guys, however. But when it comes to characters, this might be a secret. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have some familiar faces that popped up in the Log Ride. Some of the characters in the Log Ride are actually citizens of Ghost Town. Familiar people that we know and love, characters that sit on benches that we have photos taken with, reside in the Log Ride. Do you think we might see any familiar faces popping up in Mine Ride?
Well, I think so. I think, it's all big family out there. And, that was our intent originally to, the Knott's characters have a certain look to them. The Knott's, I think when you look in the Pekins and all the other different things, they have a tendency to have you want to be able to take the characters out of this mine and out of this mountain and be able to walk them out in the middle of Calico Square and have them look like they're part of a big family, or at least a community, I should say. They're not all the same family, but what would you say about that?
Yeah, totally agree. You notice a lot of the faces in the Log Ride have that look to them. They're bench people, they're folks that we felt like could be citizens of Ghost Town who come out for the hootenanny out there, and so yeah, that's a good possibility.
I like that idea. Bud Hurlbut's characters had a definite look about them, and that was something that I enjoyed. And I know in Log Ride we made sure that Bud Hurlbut character look was worked into the new characters for the Log Ride. Personal question: what happened to those original characters from the Log Ride? And hint. And what's going to happen to the original-ish characters that are left inside Mine Ride? I know that there's a few characters that you're very interested in looking at, some of your own, that you put into that attraction many years ago.
Well, years ago, we were approached by Knott's, and we did, Garnhole Productions did this so long ago. I don't know, what did we figure, was it 20 years ago? Or
It's like 92.
92 or something of that nature. And we put in the figure, the Powder Man, and then the Explosion guy, the Plunger Man. And we worked on a lot of things there. We worked on the bubbling pots. We worked on various things. They were, doing a whole rehab thing. We had given them some artwork for the Explosion Tunnel and a few other things in there. And we also did the Sawyers, the Sawyers down in the glory hole. And we, they worked well for many, many years, and they weren't, there was a lot of maintenance, and they kind of went a little bit by the wayside there, but I'd be really interested to get those out of there and see, because I think they basically ran until they died, so I'd like to see, how our frames and everything held up. But it was interesting back then. We had hoped to go on to the Explosion Tunnel. We did the characters that we did, and then all of a sudden, I think that was when the official purchase, I think, was Cedar Fair. So when the company began to change hands, they temporarily just put a moratorium on everything, a halt to everything until they could regroup, and then the new company could come in and see how they wanted to proceed. So we kind of lost touch with them. We worked on some bench people and some other things out in the park here. We did a lot for the Halloween haunt. Had some big animated creatures, and we put some monsters up in the mine, during the haunt. So we had a relationship with Knott's, and you know, it was a nice relationship. We worked for several years on a lot of different things, and then when the other company bought it out, we just kind of, you know, we just kind of lost contact. A lot of our contacts changed, and we didn't really have the contacts that we did anymore. You know, years and years and years, you know, till prior, I think the summer, well, it was a little towards the end of summer of before the 2012. I still remember I sat down on the couch in my lobby, and I think I was waiting to have everybody walk by me about quarter to 5, and my receptionist across from me said, "Garner, there's somebody on the phone from Knott's," you know, and I said, "Knott's? Are you kidding me? I haven't talked to Knott's in 20 years, you know." Picked up the phone and they said, you know, "Hey, we got a log ride out here that we need some work on. You want to talk about it?" I said, "Oh, no." So next thing you know, we're out there, and here it all kind of started, and here we are. So
that's very, very cool. I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to disembark for our own little journey. This is your last chance to fill up a plate. I know you're stuffed, but the food's fantastic, so grab another meatball. But one last question, and I'm asking very selfishly about this. I have no idea what's going to happen to these characters when they're out of the mine ride. Is there any possibility that the Orange County Archives, who gave us a lot of these photographs, by the way, and the video footage from Hurlbut's archives, they could have a head, just a head, or a body, or something from Mine Ride, Log Ride, in order to fill out their collection of Hurlbut and Knott's?
Well, you know, if it's an original character you want, you'd have to ask Knott's, who actually owns them. But if it's something that's a duplicate or something that we would create, that, I mean, they're still being created for Knott's, so if Knott's would give its blessing in some way, shape, or form, they could probably end up with something. I think the original question was what happened to the original log ride. I think I blew past that question, but a bunch of them are standing in a room in my shop, and I think they're going to go on a truck. I think the truck that's going to come pick up the Mine Ride characters that we wanted to bring back to rehab, I think when the truck gets here with to pick those up, I think we're going to have a load of all of the log ride characters that we took back to the shop come back, and then they've been kind of in our shop, and somebody said one day, "You know, that room is still full of all these weird, creepy people." And I said, "Yeah, and we just had them kind of hanging out, so they're coming back."
That's kind of awesome. And just to let you know, we also have a room here on the farm filled with really weird, creepy taxidermy. That's just kind of...
Yeah, they're all naked. They're all naked and everything. They're all waiting to come back here. So
it's wonderful looking at the naked, creepy things. All right, never mind. On that note, we are going to conclude. Garner, Bill, thank you so much. Thank you.